so let's start. My name is Nikolai and I'm the facilitator, and together with the Pre-Seed Ventures, I'm the host of this series of startup talks called Pre-Seed Academy. So today's topic is buyer personas, and we'll go into that in detail in a few seconds. Just a few words about Pre-Seed Academy. So a few years ago, Pre-Seed Ventures and I discussed how we could help the ecosystem. And we came up with this concept called Pre-Seed Academy, which is basically a startup school. So the idea is that we have a range of talks, all related to topics that are interesting for founders. That could be first-time founders, it can be serial founders. And as I said, it's a joint venture between Pre-Seed Ventures, which is a Danish VC fund. In the past, it was a public fund. Now it's a private fund, and Pre-Seed Ventures just announced that they raised their first, you can say, independent venture fund. And myself, I worked closely together with Pre-Seed Ventures for a number of years as a business angel. So I'm not formally part of Pre-Seed Ventures, but we have a number of deals together. And what I basically see as my main thing is that I invest in startups as a business angel, but I also teach about entrepreneurship. So, what are we talking about today? So today we'll introduce the concept of buyer personas. And this will be the start of a series of talks related to inbound marketing and marketing optimization, where this will be the first. So you can say a buyer persona is characterization of your ideal customer. Who do you really want? And that can be based upon either existing customers where you analyze your customer database, or it can be based upon market research if you're really early. But again, you start making a description about who do you really want to sell to, what are their needs, how do you solve those needs. I'll do this introduction very fast because I know Carol and Scarlett will go much more into detail about buyer personas. The disclaimer is also that there's a big difference between doing buyer personas or marketing in general for B2B versus B2C. So today we'll focus a lot about business to business marketing and buyer personas for business to business. That's not the same that you can't use it for business to consumer, but again, targeting a teenager to download your app is very different from getting big corporates to buy your software, as an example. So again, focus is on B2B. So the agenda for today, we have approximately 1.5 hours together. We already had a question in the chat around whether this will be recorded. Yes, it will, and will be distributed to you later. So I will start by an introduction first about the agenda, but also a very brief introduction to the concept of buyer personas and why I, as a founder, as an investor, believe that's very important. That will take approximately to 9:15. Then we have Carrick from HubSpot, and I think HubSpot is the market leader in inbound marketing, and also in platform providing inbound marketing, and also in thereby the platform where people are actually using buyer personas. So Carol will first give half an hour, you can say, introduction / workshop on how you build your buyer persona, and that will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, you have this Q&A section where you put in questions either to Carol or the rest of us. And today, since we have like two, I'm not saying separate topics, but at least two major chunks of the talk, we'll take Carol's Q&A before. So Carol will have her Q&A from 9:45 to 9:55. Then we have Scarlett from Catdesk, and she will explain how they are using buyer personas. You know, basically how they came to identify their buyer personas and also the validation of that. So where Carol will introduce the topic of buyer personas and how to build them, Scarlett will give a hands-on startup perspective on how they actually have done that in Catdesk. And that will be followed by the last 15 minutes. There will be live Q&A to Scarlett and I, talking about basically every question related to buyer personas. And a major part of this is the Q&A. So as I said, in the bottom of your screen, you have the Q&A session. You can enter your own questions. you can also upvote other people's questions. So during both the Q&A for Kara and the Q&A for Scarlett and I will select some of the questions there and facilitate that Q&A. So please remember to fill in any questions you might have. So with these few words about the agenda for today, I will try to give the 5-minute introduction to why this is, I believe, very important. So basically any startup, and now we zoom in on business to business startup, you might have an idea in the beginning about your ideal customer, right? But what often happens is that you are sort of desperate in the beginning because you really want to validate your idea. You really want to validate that any company have you need. And that's the same whether you sell coffee cups or software, hardware, whatever. You're basically in the beginning desperate. You're calling any company you can get in touch of. You're using your network, and thereby very opportunistic. You just want to have customers. And I think that makes sense in the beginning, because if you want to proceed, if you want to validate the idea for yourself, if you want to have investors on board, we all ask, okay, that's great, Peter, that you have this idea. Do you have any paying customers, right? So in the beginning, you are both trying to sell to large companies and small companies. In real life, it's most likely small companies like your first customers, and you're targeting every different industry. So I think as an investor, that makes sense in the beginning, because you need to validate your assumptions, and you might have an idea that it's a retailer that want to buy your software, but in real life, you end up selling it to banks and travel agencies instead. That's the beginning. Great. So far, now you have validated your idea. There's actually someone who is going to buy your product or service. What's the problem with that? I think the problem with that is that the basis of any marketing strategy is that companies, or consumers actually also, but companies have different needs. So when we talk about smaller versus large organizations, or we talk about different industries, they have very different needs, both in terms of the core value of the product. So industry X wants feature 1, but another industry wants another feature, right? And large companies are more concerned about something, where smaller companies maybe are concerned about price. So in terms of product, they have different needs, but that's only one part of the equation. Also in terms of your sales and marketing strategy, right? Because if you want to target small companies, maybe most likely the decision-making process is very different. The stakeholders are very different. So you can use one sales and marketing strategy. Let's just, for simplicity, say you can actually target those by Facebook ads. While if you want to sell to the largest companies in the world, maybe, I'm just saying, they need another sales and marketing strategy. Maybe the biggest bank in the world are not buying your software because you have a Facebook ad. Maybe you need a sales representative. So the problem by selling to everyone is that you cannot really fulfill their needs, right? Because when you're trying to solve everything for everyone, you're basically not satisfying anyone. And to take some examples from companies I'm involved in, I'm not talking too much about Catdesk. I'm actually an investor there, but that's the same example, right? Are you selling to big companies for your software platform, or small companies? Right now, I'm interim CEO of Pineo, that is a digital signature platform. There's a huge difference between selling your product to, say, banks or auditors, or selling it to retailers. Or Pento, an HR salary management software that is also, we also have Pre-Seed Ventures as investor. There's a huge difference between selling to SMEs or selling to mid-sized companies, and also selling in Denmark versus UK. So my point in this is that in the first happy days when you get your first customers, great, you validate your idea, check mark. But soon after that, we, the naughty investors, will come to you and say, who are you really targeting in on? You can't really solve this problem for everyone, because then you will be outcompeted, because you're not making a difference for the individual company if you try to sell to everyone, right? Okay, then you have been to a business school and you heard about marketing segmentation, and you say, okay, let's start by targeting mid-sized companies in industry X. So now we are not selling to everyone, we're targeting mid-sized companies between 50 and 500 employees in Denmark in the retail industry. And that can be for your software, it can be for your furniture, it can be for whatever. Well, I think that's a starting point. But the problem is just that even when you nail down on that, that doesn't explain what or give one really important answer, and that is why they're buying that. So if you want to sell anything to anyone, you need to have a good understanding of their needs. Why are they selling? And you can say yes, that you segment them between 50 and 500 leads might mean that they have anything or something in common, but you don't really know. So I think the problem by just relying on basic market segmentation is that you don't get that question answered. And that question answered is, why are they buying that? Because when you understand why they're buying, you also know about the alternatives and thereby about what kind of product you should do and how you should market that. The other thing that is a problem with B2B is that, and why segmentation is not enough, is that even if you nail that very specific segment, where you said, now I know it's only retailers in the Copenhagen area. Well, the problem is, who should you target within that retail? So retailer, many of them are organized in chains. So are you going at the chain level or the store level? Are you going to talk with the CFO or the HR director who are in fact buying your software? Because it's not an organization that is buying your product. It's a person. And in most B2B sales is actually in a plural, it's persons. So you need to navigate that. So you not only are talking about that you need to be very specific in terms of organization, you also need to be very specific in terms of who are buying that in these organizations for whatever reasons. And that process, you typically end up with that they're actually different stakeholders. So you need to market yourself to different ones, right? So it might be that it's both the HR director and the CFO that are important in the decision-making process. So again, it's a very brief 5-minute version. What would I do? What do I recommend my students and any startups do is start digging into their needs. I think the best theory for understanding their needs is the jobs to be done theory that you can research yourself. And that basically goes out about saying, okay, what underlying job are they trying to solve? They're not buying your product for the product's sake. They have an underlying job. Thereby, by analyzing that, you're also analyzing their needs and alternatives. And after that, you typically end up with a number of different type of persons in different companies that you could target. And that's a hard thing, because now you have to select the ones you're really going after. And also the ones you're saying, they might buy the product, but they're not in my target group, because I can't be everything for everyone. And that actually ends up that you build these buyer personas where you try to be very specific on this type of person and that type of company is my core target. And therefore you can start building your marketing messages around that. And that is in short why I think that buyer personas are essential. And you can say even more in B2B than B2C, simply because that you have different personas within different companies, and they might have different, or most likely have different wants and needs. With that very brief introduction to the topic seen from, you can say, a business angel and investor perspective, I would like to give the word to Carrick from HubSpot, who will go into more detail about how you can build your B2B buyer persona. So the word is yours, Carrick.
Thanks very much, Nicol. As always, you really did set the platform for me. I appreciate it. This is not my first rodeo speaking at Pre-Seed. It's my second. This time there's no plane, so I'm here on time, which is great. And the topic, as Nicol said, is really focused on how startups can build their own B2B buyer persona. So today we're going to do about 30 minutes. There'll be a lot of practical advice. Take what you think is relevant, leave the rest behind. But let's kick off. So let's keep this conversation interactive. So to break the ice, let's start with a brief one, a very American one, but what would your theme tune be if you were to be going into a wrestling ring in about an hour? what would they be playing for you? Just to get a taste of who's on the call, just feel free to put it into the chat. Highway to Hell, nice on AC/DC. I would have chosen that. Rocky. Eye of the Tiger, very fitting. Welcome to the Jungle. A lot of rock and roll there. Rambo. Star Wars team. Fight music. Here comes the boom. Okay, wow. So we've got a lot of people who've probably considered this question before by the looks of things. So very welcome to today's conversation. As Nicole said, my name is Cara. Currently I manage the HubSpot for X. It's called a startup program in HubSpot, which very much focuses on helping guys like yourselves grow better using HubSpot sales, marketing, and customer success. Today, what I would like is to reiterate two simple things before we dive deeper into what buyer personas are, how we can create them, and how we can use them. So again, just a more serious question, just to really set the scene. We've got about 6 logos here. And just to briefly ask the audience, what do you think these logos have in common? Okay, so let's just set the scene in terms of buyer personas here. Is there anything you think these logos have in common? Just again, put it into the chat. Dan, excellent CRM. Christian, B2C, fantastic. They're simple logos, exactly. Under 10 years old. They use HubSpot, Amit. We only wish they used HubSpot. Not all of them, I think maybe 1 or 2. Okay, so with these businesses, ideally, or logos, all of them are under 10 years old. A lot of them have gone IPO. A lot of them are, as you said, B2C. They all are SaaS models. And what this means is they put the customer also at the forefront and they build themselves into our day-to-day. So if you take my journey this morning, I got out of bed, I asked Alexa to play my updates, I played some Spotify, I didn't use anything belong to Dollar Shave Club, but the point is that these customers or these businesses are young, they're collecting data on me, and they're built into my life on a day-to-day business, on a day-to-day basis. So here, what I would say, the takeaway is, right now, these companies aren't doing anything different than their predecessors. They're selling similar product, but they do it with a better customer experience and a better understanding of who their buyer persona is. Okay, so I feel like this kind of opportunity is something that you guys as startups can use going forward to make sure that you've got the persona at the forefront and you're able to actually create a great experience. The next thing I'd like to introduce is the difference these days between this model on the right, the flywheel, and the model on the left, which is called the funnel. So is everybody familiar with the model on the right, which is the flywheel? Just put a yes or no again into the chat. Oh, we've got about 50-50 there in terms of answering. So again, if this isn't something familiar, it's another opportunity. Have a look at it. It's something that really helps businesses put the buyer persona at the forefront, that red dot, and helps them grow faster. So right now, I was in a lift about 2 months ago, and there was a woman complaining about the speed of the lift on TripAdvisor while we were in the lift. Sorry, I just have to get my dog. Get in, get in. Okay, so people's attention is very limited. So this, regardless of the fact you have a great product, it's really important that your business is built with exact alignment. Okay. Okay, so let's dive a bit deeper into this today. What are we talking about? Buyer personas. So as you can see here, the focus really as startups is something we don't have the essence or a lot of, is time and money. So today we're going to focus on how buyer personas can help you save this time and money. And the agenda is 3 very simple things. What is a buyer persona? How can we create buyer personas for our business, specifically B2B? And how do we use these buyer personas actively to do business? As Nikhil said at the start, the definition of a buyer persona is, as he said, semi-fictional, based on real data, and kind of getting an understanding of demographics, behavior patterns, motivations, and goals. I would say personally, this is the only appropriate place to start your entire effort in terms of your marketing and sales. Research your target audience. Your content, your sales conversations really need to be about the stuff your buyers love to learn about. So before you kind of start creating any of this, you need to figure out who are these target buyers. Something very common in the startup community is we're afraid founders to leave deals on the table. So as Nikhil said, it's very important to be laser focused as to what kind of person you want, coming to your website, reading your content. So the best way to get a deeper understanding of your audience is by creating personas. So just on the call, how many people have created personas and how many personas have you created? Just to see, again, the audience of the call. So Max is coming in at 1, Max, partially 3, Sebastian, none yet. 6, Bo, that's a big number. 4, has anybody created negative personas? So people you don't want to speak to? Not yet. Yes, Alan, fantastic, interesting. Not negative yet. Okay, this is something we're going to delve into. Again, creating a persona requires market research and insights that you gather from your customer base. It sounds a bit maybe overwhelming at the start. It's actually pretty fun, but keep it simple. Don't overthink it. And over time, you'll develop, you'll reinvent, and maybe you'll go so far as to create people you don't want to talk about. I would recommend, just to keep everybody on track, HubSpot has a Make My Persona tool. I'll send this to everybody after the call. We've made a buyer persona pack, which will, help you create the persona for the business based on a set of questions outlined by HubSpot. So I think Nikhil actually alluded to it. Really understanding what someone wants is extremely helpful in creating the buyer persona. So has everybody, and if you'd like, put in an example, created their unique value prop? And if you would like, maybe just put them in to the conversation. So has everybody created their unique value prop? So again, this is like your selling proposition, clear statement that will describe, what you offer and how do you solve for your persona's needs and what distinguishes you from the competition, essentially. So this is something that you're providing straight up front to the persona coming to the website. Okay, this is what we solve for. So understanding your unique value prop is very much attached to building the persona. So again, let's keep it simple. So a lot of people have created the unique value prop. People say keep it under 11 words, keep it simple. But yeah, these are kind of the questions that you'll want to ask your customers or your prospects or your leads when you're trying to understand your buyer personas. How old, job role, experiences, family goals, challenges, what keeps them up at night. List it all out. This is how detailed it can get. If you can see the tabs on the top there, you've got the priority, success factor, pain points is a good one. The journey, the decision criteria, you can really delve into this in detail. So if you want your company to grow better, having a really deep understanding of your ideal customer, that red dot in the center of the flywheel, should help you get there. So we recommend early days creating a buyer persona and constantly revising it. So let's just take it from the perspective of HubSpot. We're now about 15 years old as a company. We were a startup obviously about 15 years ago. There wasn't a lot of people on the team. I think it was under 10 when they were creating their buyer personas, and they created the famous Marketing Mary. So this Marketing Mary probably no longer exists, but she was using a BlackBerry. You know, this was how much money she used. She was using photo sharing app like Flickr, and this was her background. So this was our persona. At the time, we actually created 3 personas. We created a Marketing Mary, which was the lady in an SMB in North America who would be the marketing person within a small business. We created Enterprise Ian, who would be essentially a corporate marketing person who would have a marketing team working in a large company. And then we created Enterprise Erin, which would be the enterprise lady, and Agency Ian, who would resell HubSpot within different countries, like say the Nordics or Italy or Iberia, where you would need someone on the ground to resell HubSpot. So again, based on resources and based on the fact we needed to scale fast, save time and money, we actually chose Marketing Mary to focus on as our target persona to begin. So quick question there from Eva. When in the startup process did you create these personas? So we created them probably the first year, Eva, but the story was when we really did it well was when we decided to go to market with one solid persona, and then over time we built more personas. There's actually a Harvard case study on it, how, you know, we actually tried to focus on too many personas at once, and because of that, you know, like Nicholas said, we were trying to sell to too many people, but by honing in on one, which is the Marketing Mary lady, early days, as early as possible, we were able to sell to the lady that was in line with the decision maker, who would use the product and would inevitably help us grow the business. So this was key to us in our growth as a startup. Thanks, Eva. Now, if you fast forward 14 years, we realize Marketing Mary is now actually Marketing Michelle. So she's got maybe, the same haircut, but she's an aspiring CMO. She no longer uses a BlackBerry at the simplest level, but she's the director, VP of marketing. So you need to keep, I suppose, on top of your game as to how these people develop over time. If I go to the sales floor in HubSpot now, they're talking about salesperson Sam. They're talking about enterprise Erin, marketing Michelle. So there's multiple personas built out dependent on, you know, the business size, location. Even on our team, when we started, we created Growth Gary. So maybe a lot of people on today's call can relate to Growth Gary, which is the startup persona, head of growth, not afraid of technology, you know, skilled in terms of, you know, building and kind of piling software together. And yeah, aspires to be an entrepreneur and have a personal brand. So this is the persona my team talk about. David, quick question. How many real people do you interview for collecting true data? Okay, so I mean, that's actually a very good point by David. So again, we understand that personas matter to the business. So in order to create them, researching buyer personas is important. So again, between 2 to 5 people as a starting point would be who we would interview. Not everybody will have that many customers. It might be people who are simply doing a demo. But yeah, we would interview customers and potential customers, either in person, over the phone, to discover, you know, what they like about the product or service, what they don't like. We ask questions about their job, their title, their typical day-to-day. And we look for behavioral traits to kind of understand how we can use that. So I would say 2 to 5 is a starting point, but not everybody has the luxury of having, you know, that many personas to begin with. But it is a critical step, David, in establishing your buyer personas, is finding some people to speak to suss out who your persona is. So again, think about your unique value proposition, think about the questions you may answer, and have an understanding then of the next step, which is researching your buyer personas. So Martinez has come in with what does the persona represent? So the persona is like your fictional customer, essentially. So who inevitably is going to be your end user, someone who will buy the products. So someone who can make a decision to purchase, or someone who can understand the value of the product, because that may be different people. Exactly. So this is something that we would, recognize if you're in B2B or B2C. So essentially, if I'm going after like an elephant company, like say Coca-Cola, which comes to mind, I'll probably do, focusing on a few personas within that company. So essentially, you'd have your marketing Mary, but you'll also, have the decision maker, which would be, financing Frank, for example. So again, dependent on the business, the industry, if you're selling a windmill or a t-shirt, then you'll, decide how many personas or what persona you're focusing on. So Max has come in, basically a representation of a group you target with your product. Exactly, Max. And again, you can call them whatever you want: finance manager Melanie, landscape Larry, caregiver Cassie, but they're only basically fictional generalized representations of real people. So by grouping people into persona categories, it makes it easier for the marketing team, the product designers, the salespeople, and the service people to tailor the content, the messaging, the product development, and services into that aligned, business goal, which you saw on the circle. Okay. So let's look at some key activities when we're thinking about this. Let's dig a bit deeper, okay? So how can we use our buyer personas? So we know, okay, what a buyer persona is. We know why it's important to marketing. We know we need to research the personas by using the Make My Persona tool, interviewing customers, looking for behavioral trends, making sure our forms on our website actually are asking the questions, are you a student, a CEO, a marketing person, to define the persona early days. If it's a student that signs up to HubSpot, they'll be brought on to another, automation list. Whereas if it's an enterprise marketing person, they'll receive a call with sales. So to be able to, define the difference between that, we would, optimize the difference between, the questions in the forms, and then allowing, people to go the next step to talk to the sales team. And the sales team would be used to kind of figure out the buyer personas also, and help you find interviewers to research the buyer personas. Quick question: what is a typical sales time lead for B2B sales, and what is the best way to approach them from your experience? Okay, so this is a really good question, Niels. I think Nicole's coming in with a few rules there. We have to hold off on questions, but this we're going to focus on in the next 3 slides, and it is an excellent question in terms of how sales actually will connect with the persona in terms of, actually leading them through the sales process. So let's look at how we can use the persona. So what are the benefits of this image, just for everybody on the call? We've got Felix Lopez. This is what he looks like on a dashboard in a CRM. And you can see here a breakdown of who he is. So for example, he's a prospect or a lead within our database. Okay, once put in there, everything is in the same place. So bringing back to the fact that we've gathered a load of information about Felix Lopez, who's managing an incubator in, for example, Madrid. And as we can see here, you know, the sales team can see this, the marketing team can see this, the CEO can see this, that, you know, Felix Lopez has looked at this specific website page. He is interested in Series A in terms of, you know, the actual URL he looked at. His profile is that he is the director of the SecLab EdTech Accelerator. And what this means is it will really focus on our response in order to kind of follow up with Felix. So again, making sure that we understand our personas, it will save us time long-term in terms of like collaborating as a team to follow up with who we're focusing on and move the sales process, the marketing processes faster, because we'll immediately know what Felix Lopez's needs are, his interests, etc. So there are a lot of ways you can use your personas to fuel better marketing, sales, and services initiatives. And let's look at a few that are quite relevant. Okay, so I'm going to bring up quite a few here on the screen, but I think this really helps hit home how relevant buyer personas are and how we can use them within the business. And then we'll use a real life example of how we can apply this to your startup. Okay. So again, how to use a buyer persona. The interviews, the surveys, the extensive research, the fancy PDF you put together to, you know, unveil your personas has come together. It's all behind you. You've taken the time, but there's a number of different things that you need to kind of actually work into your strategy to help you better understand the value of the resource you've created. Okay, so use language that your persona is familiar with. Okay, so again, if you're GoPro, you're going to be giving people content on video. It will probably be fast. It'll probably be active, as opposed to someone who is maybe, you know, in an accountancy firm who wants to read a white paper. Okay, so once you know how the persona is, you know, different, you'll communicate different. You'll start speaking their language. You'll use the buzzwords they'll use, maybe the slang they use, and this will help you ensure your message resonates. Segment your list of contacts by buyer persona. Again, very important. If you take, you know, the Amazon model, this flywheel, you know, Amazon will recommend things that are related to me, not related, you know, to somebody else. This will be specific to me. So you can segment your contacts by buyer persona. So list segmentation is key to delivering kind of more personalized experience for your leads and customers. So once you've segmented your list by buyer persona, you're able to do all sorts of great stuff. Welcome back to the website, Cara. Here is, you know, what you've looked at before. Create a piece of content with a specific persona in mind. So again, by creating buyer personas, this gives you an enhanced knowledge of what your ideal customers like and what they'll respond to, as well as, you know, what they struggle with. So a famous question we would ask, well, maybe not that famous, but what is your biggest challenge? So by understanding this, we understand the pain of the customer. By understanding their biggest challenge, we can offer them a solution to that. So if a startup comes to the website, we identify its growth Gary. We say, okay, growth Gary, what's your biggest challenge? Funding, time, money. Okay, here's top 10 solutions, how to save time in your day-to-day by creating personas. Okay. Auditing your existing content for persona alignment. Okay, so this helps you, and this is back to the Marketing Mary persona we chose earlier. This helps us align all next steps with the persona we've created. So has everybody aligned the content or existing content they've created with their persona? Maybe just put a yes or no in the chat. No, Bo, not yet, Bo. Okay, so I think this is the first question where everybody's actually said no, and no, not in most of my startups by Nikolai. Thanks for that. So yeah, and again, don't like, we're not trying to overthink the process, but at the very simplest level, if you think, okay, step one, understand the persona is really important. basically, like, by creating content isn't going to just, like, it'll deliver like traffic, but like content marketing employed strategically delivers the right traffic. So who do you actually want going to your website? So the goal is, yeah, okay, let's drive the right people to the website, but with specific methods. We're going to drive the right people. And if this is done organically, these people usually stay around longer as opposed to dragging them in via paid ads. So if I'm actually, you know, got my unique value proposition, I'm solving for the persona's problem by engaging in this process and actively giving the person, you know, that picture at the start from the notebook, what they want when they want it. This will determine the best form of content and create a pattern of frequency. So if you're able to tailor the style to your audience and focus on buyer persona topic that the audience is searching for online, and be able to repeat this and then hand those leads to sales who actively know the process that that persona came in, then this is a powerful strategy that really produces steady amounts of the right people coming from the start. I think that's key in terms of what Nikolai said. So Anders has come in. Our work with ICP and personas are more directed towards outbound and lead generation at this point in time. Yeah, and Anders, I would never, I think this is great. I think a mixture of outbound and inbound is great. I was on a call with Gong. If anybody's familiar with that Israeli company, they received 240 million recently. And they said, yeah, I mean, they couldn't get off the ground with just inbound. So they mixed outbound and inbound. And, you know, their sales conversations were directed towards their persona, even though maybe it was a cold call or a quick, you know, a LinkedIn message outreach, but they were directing the same kind of process of, you know, creating the content, creating the keywords, and creating like a specific audience in terms of outreach. So again, regardless of sales, outbound, inbound, appropriate place is create the persona. And that's a really important part, because this our audience is going to search for something. You create the content and you get the right people in, or you search for them, but you search for the right person. And again, you know, you're getting the right people in. So what we would say is these activities here are extremely important in order to actually utilize the persona. So I have a quick question in about reallocating your human resources, which is the last one there on the slide. And yeah, what that means, I think, is very cognizant to what we discussed at the start of the call, which is the same principle, like reallocate your human resources, kind of like a bit of jargon really, but the same principle can be applied to personnel. So if you know the majority of your audience is on Instagram and you want to make sure you or someone of your team is regularly monitoring the network and engaging with the people who belong to this target persona, the goal here isn't to always hunt people down. Instead, you just want to make sure that you're hanging, well, not like as trivial as hanging out, but you're in the location where these personas are. So like not everybody will be on LinkedIn. Someone recently sold me a pension on Instagram. So, I mean, we've spoken in the past about, okay, maybe you don't have just a SaaS product that works with, you know, people in B2C or B2B. Maybe you are selling, you know, a very specific product. So where do these people live? Do they live on Quora? Do they live on Reddit, Instagram, Facebook? So understanding where these people are will help you put the right time and energy in the right place. So quick question there from Amit. When and how often to update the personas? What do you suggest about creating personas with an expiry date? Okay, excellent uptake there, Amit. I think the key is to refresh the personas. So again, dependent, like the way what I've been in HubSpot probably nearly 6.5 years now. So when we started in Dublin, we actually had European personas. There's only 5 people in the office. So we always felt that we weren't speaking the same language in terms of like the North American sales team to our personas. So we created that when we created the satellite office within Europe. So when we expanded, I suppose was the answer. We created new personas when we created new product. So that salesperson Sam or growth Gary was created out of a need for a new area of the business or an industry. So to answer your question, Ahmed, how often would depend on how fast maybe you're growing, the locations you're expanding in, and like if it's Singapore or the Nordics. I mean, I think we'll all agree, I work regularly with people in Israel versus Iberia versus the Nordics. And yeah, we all have common denominators, but we also have very different needs, wants, behaviors. And that's when, you know, you want to kind of create different personas with location, new business, different life cycle stages, lengths. They're all kind of key. And this is something when you're managing your sales CRM, you're able to see, you know, how many personas, say within HubSpot, are marketing Mary. How many personas are salesperson Sam? So when someone comes to the website and selects sales, they'll automatically be directed to, for example, this persona list. Okay, so auditing your existing content for persona alignment is very important and useful. Combining personas with life cycle stages to map out, you know, what's happening. Like, what does a salesperson say to your marketing Mary, as opposed to, you know, your CEO Claire, for example. And again, I'll send you a pack on this just to give you an outline of how this could work when you select your personas. Any questions on that? Okay, so let's just take this information and put it into, which most people prefer, a kind of a real life situation. Let's call this guy Timmy, maybe Sean in Ireland is the common name. I'm not sure what's the most common name in Denmark. In Spain, it's Juan or Maria, if I'm right in saying. But let's just take your average John Doe and how this person will move through the ecosystem of understanding the business, you know, attracting them in, converting them into a lead, closing them into a customer, and then delighting them as someone that will recommend your product. And this is that red dot going all the way through the journey. So let's introduce you to Timmy. Okay, so I mean, let's see how his world is slightly different to the world 10 years ago, for example, when he's buying something. So Timmy is like, say, your average IT buyer. This is his overview: age, name, very simple understanding of who Timmy is. And his purchasing process looked a bit like this: very linear, kind of straight line, conference, sales call. You know, the famous BANT was used in the past: budget, authority, needs, timeline. Like, this is the kind of process that Timmy went through when, you know, people didn't really have Google or, you know, like so much available in order to understand what they were buying. So you can see here, he's got his awareness, consideration, decision stage. Has everybody created these kind of different stages for the lead within the business? And this used to work very well. Andrea, nice. Simon's in with a yip. Excellent. Okay, so we've got a lot of solid frameworks here. And this is a very useful framework, and like can be useful now and before. And David, not yet, don't worry. And like, this was probably a world where prospects didn't know they could figure out their solutions to their problems because Google wasn't there, like a huge source of like truth, or there wasn't blogs, etc. So like a salesperson was used. But like, as we said, prospects are much more informed today about your products. We've identified our own needs, and this reliance on sales and less reliance on marketing has changed. So fast forward to 2020. Again, so Timmy's there, you know his background, he scrolls through, lands on LinkedIn, finds an interesting post, lands on the blog, okay, needs to take action, talks to his friends, follows up with some, you know, Google research, downloads the ebook because that's relevant, etc. So his journey may look a bit like this. So as you can see, there's a lot of different experiences in here, with the sales team not coming in right at the end, but at different parts. Okay. So this is interesting. And again, this is something just to take note as your business and the journey of the buyer persona through the business, and to be that kind of ongoing customer who will continue to buy, recommend, renew, etc. So there's your awareness, consideration, decision. So for anyone on the call, sounds like a high level of cost. Exactly, John comes in with, sounds like a high level of cost per acquisition or per customer. And again, depends on the customer, but this is kind of, I suppose, that kind of not so linear model. So Gustav has come in. Are you talking about ZMOT? This is like, yeah, this is an interesting, I actually don't know too much about this, Gustav, but it's like zero moment of truth, like, which is like the discovery and awareness stage in the buying cycle where the customer or the consumer reaches like a product prior to the seller's knowledge. So yeah, basically 80% of the sales process, and not to use statistics too much, but like this is already done. You're ready to decide before you speak to the actual salesperson. So you've identified your own needs, you've designed your own solution, all before even dealing with a salesperson. Okay. So people kind of expect businesses these days to be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And people be like, the expectation is to, especially like I find the Nordics to be super efficient, and you want to get things done by yourselves. So self-service means that people don't really want to talk to humans that much. They expect like unbelievable service that they can self-serve. And if they get really stuck and they have to talk to a human, they expect that human to be super sharp, know exactly what they want and the context before the call. So this is why persona development can save you a lot of hassle, because effectively the bar has been raised in terms of like the customer service and the customer experience dramatically. So I've got about 3 minutes left, so we're just going to wrap up here. But again, just switching from that heavy reliance on sales to marketing is important. So again, bringing it back to the original point of the customer or the buyer persona as the afterthought has changed. And if you guys take anything, this idea of the better experience that logos at the start of the conversation brought to the table, which is they've grown massively because they're managing their personas at a great level where they're at the center, which is the growth of the business. So again, it's not what you sell, it's how you sell and how you go to market. And our selling motion has to match the way our buyers would like to engage with us. An example of this is I connect with guys every day that don't have any time. Everything needs to be done yesterday when I'm partnering with, you know, incubators, accelerators, and VCs in different industries and locations. This is why I used, for example, Vidyard to connect via LinkedIn to create a meeting. So get a bit savvier with how you're connecting with your personas in the way that they want. So just to wrap up, in the words of Steve Jobs, you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards. So understand the persona. You can't start with the technology and then figure out where you're going to sell it. And this is how we win. So thanks everybody for the time. I think I just got in on time there, and happy to answer any questions you have also. And I'll send everything after the conversation.
So Kara, I think if we have in 1 minute, because there's a few questions specifically asked to you in the Q&A. So I think the first one is from Simon around whether it makes sense to work on personas when you're not 100% sure you have a product market fit. So basically, what are you going to do in the early days, right? Are you going to start targeting broad, you know, before you really know whether customers want to buy, or you start making personas and then testing these personas? What kind of process do you normally see works?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, I'm just taking it from experience. I would say like our product 15 years ago was an automation tool that wasn't very good. We thought we had a product market fit, but I mean, obviously it's developed more. But yeah, as soon as you're ready to go to the market with your product, so like you're out, you've got like a minimum viable product, MVP, I would suggest it's a good time to start talking about who you're talking to, which is your persona.
Cool. And a final question from Hans Henrik is that how do I measure the quality of our personas, right? So, whether they're important, are they important to my startup? Do they actually think and act like the assumptions that are made? So basically, how do you make all these assumptions up about marketing Mary or John Doe or whatever, but how do you measure whether they're valid or not?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think this is one of the things, like why personas is so relevant, because you can create a revenue report on your persona in your software based on the fact that you've generated the persona. So you can create a revenue report on how much revenue Marketing Mary has brought to the business based on the fact that you've tagged your contacts as the persona early days. So that's where you can justify your marketing spend, your sales spend, because this is all like a logically created strategy. Does that answer the question, or?
I think it does. Thanks a lot, Cara. If you could unshare your screen, and then we can give the word to Scarlett, who will talk a little bit about the perspective from Catdesk. Hi, Scarlett.
Hi. Hello. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. Very happy to be talking to you. I will be sharing my screen now. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Okay, then. And I'll just get started then. Apologies in advance. I do not have any GIFs in my presentation. I feel like it's extremely lacking now in comparison. But so following on from Cara's presentation, what I am hopefully going to do is contextualize this a little bit and explain what I've done with personas at Catdesk. So as Nikolai already pointed out at the start of the presentation, Catdesk is one of our earliest investors. In fact, our first ever investor was Nikolai. So there is a long-running affinity between Pre-Seed Academy and Catdesk, which started back in 2015. But I only joined in August of this year, and I joined as the content lead. So my role at Catdesk is essentially to ensure that content, communications, PR, branding is all executed very consistently throughout the business, and to make sure that we are using the insights that we glean in sales and customer success accurately and effectively in marketing, and also to make sure that what we're doing in marketing, where we're gaining insights about our customers, which is a big part of my role, is also being fed back into the business and being learned from. So it's a very lean team. We're not super segmented. We're definitely not a siloed team. So what I do spans across lots of different departments, and you'll probably see that as I go through the presentation, that we're not super segmented in the way that we use personas, although our personas themselves are indeed segmented. So just a little bit about me before we get into it. So I am, like I said, new-ish to Catdesk at this point, joined in August as the content lead. And my background is in content marketing. So prior to that, I spent the last 5 years at a content marketing agency called Quill, which is based in London, where we primarily do, we primarily did retail e-commerce content. So my specialism was luxury fashion, but I also did some technology. So I worked with Tommy Hilfiger, Louis Vuitton, also worked with Amazon Alexa, creating lots of different content in lots of different languages to reach lots of different audience segments. And my prior experience with buyer personas as a result was always that they were given to me. They were fed to me as something to execute on. So in my last position there as a content strategy director, I would normally interact with the client on a specific project. They would tell me about their kind of goals for the project, their revenue goals, engagement, etc. And then they would hand over the personas for us to ensure that we were aligning with. So I have a lot of experience on delivering against personas, But when I arrived at Catdesk, that was the first time that I was to be designing the personas myself. So my objective at Catdesk was really to go a little bit further than what's typically called buyer personas. And that's just because we wanted to create personas that could be used holistically. Like I said, we're a fairly lean team, and we wanted to make sure that the work that I was doing was able to be used by marketing and sales and customer success and tech, kind of each in their own way, to gain a better understanding of the users of Catdesk and improve our interactions with them across the board. As Cara pointed out in one of her later diagrams, it is not a linear journey anymore, and we can't rely on the fact that marketing comes first, then the salesperson, and then the ops team. At Catdesk, it's often not that way around. So we wanted to create personas that were a little bit more multifaceted as a result. Rather than create personas from scratch, which I presume is what a lot of the people who are attending this presentation might be tasked with doing, I, in fact, was reviewing an existing set of personas. But what I did know before beginning was that they were, for lack of a better term, collecting dust. They weren't being used actively in the business, and they weren't being used in marketing in the last few months before I arrived. So I saw my task as these kind of 4 key elements. First, to understand our existing personas. Secondly, to validate them against any current evidence that we had. Thirdly, updating them to remove bias, and I'll talk a bit more about each of these in a second. And then fourth, communicating them to the team. So what I wanted to do today is just run you through how I approached each of those tasks, and then tell you a little bit more about what's next for Catdesk, because I saw a couple of the questions in the prior presentation about validating, qualifying, updating. Those are all things that are really important to me as well. So those are on our agenda, and particularly as we get a better and better grasp of the data that we have in HubSpot, that will allow us to kind of use the personas, kind of tweak them and make them much more accurate with time. So if I haven't already said this, and I don't believe I have, before I kind of launch into what we were doing, Catdesk is an equity management platform, which essentially allows startups and scale-ups to track and record their company ownership. So it's really helpful for employee share plan management. It's also really helpful for investor relations, and just allows startups and scale-up companies to have a digitized record of all kind of transactions of equity in their business. We primarily support companies that are fast growth, so they'll be going through fundraising rounds. They'll be kind of, growing their headcount and bringing on employees and adding them to the share plans. They might be bringing in new investors or advisors who, of course, will get shares, a share in the business in return for their time, their advice, their expertise. So hopefully that context provides a little bit kind of helpful background information as to the broad audience, which is leaders in startups. So that's our broad audience, but of course, we were segmenting them through the personas. So one other piece of context that was just quite interesting, I think that Nikolai mentioned this right at the beginning, is jobs to be done. So this was super important to us as a framework for the personas, and something that we were actually adding on top of the existing stuff. At the time that we were renovating the personas, we were also working on a website redesign, which was really good timing for me. So I was completely immersed in the product, how we unpack its different features, and how we frame the different solutions as jobs to be done. So if I go on to the next slide. So when it comes to existing personas, my objective here was really to learn what insights were informing our starting point. Had a bit of a tricky kind of situation coming into it, because the previous marketing team had all departed and been wholesale replaced by me and my boss, the growth director. There was one extra person in our marketing team at this point, but they weren't previously working really closely with the CMO. So we had that classic conundrum of the resource kind of housing the information, having left the business, and therefore not really having access to the origins of the existing personas. But what I did is I went to the current team and spoke to them about kind of when were the personas created, what were the origins of them. They were designed using a HubSpot template, of course, something that I'm sure lots of you guys will rely on, and I would definitely recommend that for the first time you're designing personas. So one of the people that I spoke to primarily was our head of customer onboarding. That is Cindy, and she was probably the person who's been in the business for longest, who is a customer facing employee, so was able to give me a lot of understanding of what conversations led to the personas being formulated. And I was told that it was essentially kind of a bit of a brainstorm between the marketing managers in the previous team setup, the CEO, and the customer onboarding. So a nice kind of cross section of people who had kind of different touch points with the customers. When I'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, here we go. We've got a snapshot of an old layout. So this is using a HubSpot template. It's probably been updated since then, because I know that this was put together, I think it was early 2019, so a little bit older. And so I learned that these were put together essentially using a combination of like hands-on insights, a combination of kind of qualitative research, so just conversations that had been being had, and then also just like a little bit of imagination to fluff them out. So my next task was to validate these personas against the current evidence. And what I wanted at this point was to understand the relevance of the personas and any evidence that we had for that. So like anecdotal or current data evidence, like in HubSpot or somewhere, to see whether these personas were still accurate, because I knew that there'd been a little bit of time that had elapsed. And the second thing that I really wanted to do here was understand the priority order. So at Catdesk, we have 6 personas, and we know that 2 of them are far and above our priority personas. So those are the ones where we have the most interaction with them by far. And when it comes to content marketing and our just overall marketing strategies, we need to make sure that we're not spending 90% of our time on a persona that represents 10% of our customer base. So I again came up against a couple of hurdles here. Like many fast-growing companies, and I'm sure plenty of people in the audience will relate to this, our data on our users and our customers is imperfect. And at the time, I wasn't able to kind of dig anything out of HubSpot that would validate particular points about the challenges or the reasons that they were coming to us and with questions, and having those kind of addressed, because customer interactions and like different parts of the sales process weren't necessarily always being tracked in the same place or in the same way in HubSpot. So that's probably something for us to tackle, and is something kind of that we're working on an ongoing basis now that we're a bigger team, cleaning up our data on HubSpot. So that wasn't really something that I could go to. And like I said before, instead, I primarily spoke with Cindy, who was our head of customer onboarding, and was able to get some insights on where these personas might be kind of less valid than they had been in the past. What I also did is I looked at our persona tags. So that was one thing in HubSpot that had been done really, really well. Obviously, it's partially automated, but what we did is, because our personas are split by the typical kinds of job titles that people have, what I was able to do is look at where they had been automatically assigned into one of the persona brackets, and therefore see that for us, the personas that represent the CFO and the financial controller, or whoever's going to be the second in command in a business, were above and beyond our kind of primary people to speak to, and our primary buyer personas. I can see that I'm getting some questions. Just want to bring up the chat here. Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. So updating them to remove bias. So this is probably one where I'm not saying the exact same thing that Kara's saying, and you know, there are many different ways to approach personas, but I wanted to give a little bit of insight as to one of the things that was important to me when it came to changing the personas and bringing them into 2020, so to speak. Because when I read through Catdesk's personas, this is essentially the impression that I got of who our target audience was. And you can see there, well, on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, that's the Bullingdon Boys Club. Not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's an Etonian private kind of very secretive boys club. You can spot a fairly famous world leader down there on the steps. And on the right, that's just the guys from Mad Men. But essentially what was important here, and my goal was really to reduce any kind of stereotyping that could harm business, which is something as a champion of diversity and inclusion that was really important to me. Because while personas can be really, really helpful, they can also end up being restrictive. And in very well-intentioned efforts to bring personas to life, it is to give them really fully fledged attributes and personalities like genders, names, locations, salaries, education levels, and it really depends on what kind of business you're in. In certain contexts, these attributes are vital. So a pharmaceutical company needs to segment medication users into teenagers, adults, and over 60s, because the way that age groups will use that medication completely varies, and therefore the messaging around it needs to be different. But in many other contexts, attributes like these can be at best arbitrary and at worst a little bit damaging. So for example, with the Catdesk personas, when we say that our typical CFO is called Peter and he went to Eton and he lived with his wife in Hampstead, for me, it recalls that depressing statistic from however many years ago about the fact that there's more men called John leading FTSE 500 companies than there are total number of women. And what it accidentally does is can reinforce stereotypes about the inaccessibility of these high-ranking jobs. And this is particularly important at Catdesk when we are not going for kind of regular consumers, it's not B2C, but we are going, even within those businesses that we're targeting, to people on the senior management team, so people with the highest ranking jobs. Catdesk itself is a fintech made up of experts from very non-traditional backgrounds. Most of us don't actually come from finance. And so we really see it as our task to pay it forward to ensure that our target audience also comes from all walks of life. So, you know, a personal anecdote for me is that when I looked at the CFO persona and I saw that he was called Peter and that he went to Eton and that he was kind of very, very posh, and we had an image of a white man there, that really jarred with the fact that someone in my family who is called Mohammed is the CFO of a target company, and he is absolutely not fitting the bill there, but is somebody that we would go after. And what you don't want to do is accidentally perpetuate an unconscious bias. So if I go on to my next slide, a couple of the things that we updated to remove the bias were the names, because they tend to have kind of location associated with them, or they tend to have like a more Caucasian or non-Caucasian meaning kind of interpretation. We removed the gender, which is obviously implicit in the names, salary, education level. So to keep a lot of the good stuff, and there was really good stuff in the original personas. I didn't want to, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater, but shed those unhelpful bits to make sure that we ended up with a set of personas that really supported us in reaching our business goals. So an example persona, so we looked at organized Ollie a couple of slides ago, and we changed that to the operator. So each of our personas is now essentially like a key term, but it doesn't have a name or kind of gender associated with it. So we've got the operator, another one is the controller, another one is the upholder, and another one is the expert. So they're still kind of people, but they're less kind of like well-formed. What things we added in, I mentioned jobs to be done by Catdesk a little bit earlier. We also added in career aspirations, because one of the things that we talked as a team about being really important was making sure that we use the information in our personas to help these people look good. And the way that they want to look good tends to be the job that they're going for. So the thing that they're after, how do we make that seem more achievable to them? So for something like Catdesk, which is an equity management platform, if we can help a financial controller look like he is the most flawless bookkeeper when it comes to company ownership records, everything that needs to be filed to HMRC and Companies House, for example, in the UK, is absolutely ready, it's accurate, it's done on time, he's not incurring any extra legal fees accidentally, then that makes him look good enough, or him or her look good enough to be in line for the role that he aspires to. And then the last one was Catdesk Team Insight. So any kind of active information that we'd received from the team, and from Cindy was the person I mentioned earlier, that could help us kind of formulate or use these personas more. So this was our new COO persona. Like I said, a lot of the stuff has stayed here, but we've added in the jobs to be done by Catdesk. So save time by streamlining reporting processes, generate accurate reporting for them as a non-expert. And then the team insight here is that we don't tend to have much involvement with managing the account, except when a company is so small that it doesn't have a CFO. And the importance of that is essentially that if we've got the situation where the where the COO is the person we're talking to, we know that it's a much smaller team, and therefore we know how to kind of adapt our communications with them accordingly. I've got 1 minute left, so I'm just going to quickly zoom through what we did next. So my task, after kind of formulating, updating, talking about these with my marketing director, with Cindy, and also with the CEO, was to communicate these to the team, because everybody had had fairly negative past experiences with personas. So things that were built and then not used, or built or were ineffective and out of touch. So what I did is I launched them with a Loom video that people could watch in their own time. And then I held a whole team workshop with an activity where I asked people in breakout groups, how would they frame an event differently for different personas, so they could see kind of how do we bring them to life. And finally, what's next for Catdesk? We're already using personas to segment our audience, prioritize those segments, as I mentioned earlier, and tailor our communications, such as nurture email flows. We're using them to plan content. So which remaining personas do we need customer testimonials for, and plan content distribution. So none of our personas use Reddit, for example, which I think was mentioned by Cara at the end of her presentation. So we're not going to invest any time there. And then finally, use HubSpot to validate with data this anecdotal evidence that we've kind of acquired over the course of the process. Okay, then, so I'll wrap up there. Thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, Scarlett. We will go now to the Q&A, and I'll just open the Q&A thing. I think maybe that's both a question for you, but I can also answer that, is about vertical specific personas, right? So is that something now, Catdesk, you are an equity management platform, are you having industry specific personas, or is the operator, if we take that as an example, the same for different kind of companies you're targeting?
So the way that we segment our broad customer segment is actually, our broad audience base is actually not by vertical, but it's by tiers. So we divide our prospects into tiers according to size, because that is the biggest way that impacts how they're going to use Catdesk. So because we have different pricing for different companies according to how many stakeholders they have, that's the most valid way for us to cut it. So for example, actually, I mentioned that email nurture flow, and what we did in that example is actually create 2 different nurture flows for the CFO persona, and split it into for tier 2 and 3 companies, which have upwards of 50 employees, and tier 1 companies that have 0 to 50, and therefore are actually facing quite different challenges as CFOs.
Yeah, I can also give just my 2 cents. I think that in many cases, industries are so the personas in different industries are so different. So sometimes you need those. For instance, in one of my companies, we sell software to auditors and to lawyers, right? And you can say from the outside, oh my God, they're sort of the same breed, sort of almost the same education, at least from the outside, in these conservative industries. But in fact, they have very different jobs to be done, right? So when communicating to auditors, you need to communicate very different than lawyers. So I think, as Scarlett said, it's really case dependent, but sometimes it makes sense to make in that case, it could be an operator lawyer or operator accountant. Scarlett, here's another question to you in regards to when. So do we need to make a persona when you have basically the MVP? Or when do you think that if you should go and advise an early stage startup, right? When should they start thinking about these personas in your opinion?
So I think it depends on what your marketing activity is at that point. If you're really, I mean, my impression would be at the MVP stage of a startup, what you want to be doing is making sure that's a part of all of the conversations with people that you're surveying, people that you're speaking to understand how they might or how they do use the product. But until you are, until you've got kind of different departments with different functions interacting with your different customers, particularly with marketing kind of to an unknown audience rather than having conversations which are kind of through connections or through events and webinars, then I would probably say that you don't want to do too much work on something that is really still kind of taking its own shape, and when the product itself is likely to change or pivot quite a lot over the next 6-12 months. What you don't want to do is end up developing personas that restrict the way that you're talking about the product.
Yeah, I can also add my input here. I think in the beginning, of course, you have assumptions, but these assumptions are most likely wrong. So what you're doing is you're basically chasing a lot of different leads, and many of them will not end up in something, right? And many of them will be network driven, where you talk to one type of company and then, no, this kind of product is not really for them, but they then introduce you to another one. So in fact, what I often see is that successful startups have maybe tested indirectly 10 or 15 or 20 different personas. And then at some point of time, they see, okay, we see a pattern here. Now we actually have sold to 2 or 3 of the same type of personas. Maybe this is our new assumption that we're going after. So I think I will also be a little bit afraid of too early to limit yourself, because then you can spend a lot of time on do the obvious thing, but the obvious is not always the right thing. Here's a, just have to go up to the early one here. Maybe I think that was actually a question to Carolyn about the non-personas, but maybe I can ask you, Scarlett, have you also identified non-personas in Catdesk? Basically ones where you said, hey, they on the outside could look interesting, but we shouldn't spend time and resources on that type of companies/person?
That's an interesting question. I think that one thing that Catdesk is contending with is the timing of adding personas. So I would never kind of bring a new persona into the fold unless I felt like there was absolutely a strategy and there was like a valid argument for marketing to them. But for example, at Catdesk, we have secondary personas, and like I said, taking the buyer out of it for us makes it broader. And our kind of secondary audience is employees. So the people who are shareholders or option holders within the business who will have access to a Catdesk account. And it is really important for them to buy into the company, particularly considering kind of our long-term ambitions for the business. But for now, it's not the right time to market to them and to try and get them on board, because they don't actually hold enough weight to bring a client to Catdesk. They are only somebody we want to enhance the experience for once the buyer, who is probably going to be the operator or the expert, which is the name for our CFO persona, is actually kind of already on board and already brought the company in. So that's one that's kind of teetering on the outside, and at some point it will become a persona because of the way that Catdesk will develop. But for now, you know, as tempting as it is, and as many content ideas that I have for communicating with those people, this is where our personas and validating them in HubSpot is really helpful to kind of prevent us from kind of veering off course, so to speak.
As what I see often, and now we talk about B2B, I think one of the classic things I see is startups like Catdesk start with targeting the very small companies, right? Because that's the one who are going to buy from you when you have no references. Like that could be Catdesk, it could be Peneo, it could be Pen. To many of the startups I'm in, we start one, and many then start moving upwards because then they have the product and they have references. And I see actually some startups indirectly work with non-personas there because they then start tailoring their product and their offering, including the price, to larger companies. So many of them just know that if an SME comes in and want to talk to them, the chance they're closing that deal in the end is just so small. And they risk spending a lot of time and resourcing on chasing that. So I think what I see in several startups I'm involved in is that they basically try to segment these in the beginning in order, in forms, whatever, how many employees do you have, to basically to separate the two so they can spend time on the bigger ones where they think that they have a bigger chance, and then put the smaller ones into a more like marketing automated flow where, of course, if then at the end really wants to buy, of course, they get the opportunity, but you're not spending too much manual time into them. I think that's the type of non-persona I see work quite good. Emma, I have a question here regarding, the classic issue. You have different business units and different type of customers. How do you manage working with different personas there? Where you basically we have a John over here working in industry X. We have a Jane over here working in a completely different industry. How do you, is that something you work on with in Catdesk, Scarlett, where you're seeing very different type of content needed for these ones, or have you segment one of those away so you're only focusing on one?
You know what, that reminds me of a really interesting insight into a persona divide that I saw at Farfetch, which is a big like luxury fashion e-commerce platform, who I worked with for a number of years at Quill, and they said that they had two personas. They had their secret persona and their real persona. So their real persona was Russian wives of billionaires, which are the kind of people who spend a lot of money on Farfetch. And that's their real persona, which is the secret persona. And then their persona that they present to people is a young 20-something woman, a bit of a Carrie Bradshaw with an impossibly high budget for, a career in journalism or whatever she does. And the fact was we needed to create content that would appeal to both of these. And I think that one of the challenges is not to try and create really distinct content for really distinct people, because what you don't want to do is end up in a situation where somebody lands on the page and it's very jarring to them because this isn't the content that was tailored exactly to them. So you kind of need, I would say, if you've got really distinct personas, I would always recommend kind of making sure with every kind of content plan or framework that you put together, that you've got something in there that answers the primary question that both of your key personas are going to have. So that it still appeals to those. It might lean to one, but it shouldn't alienate the other. That's really important.
Scarlett, I think we're basically almost out of time. If you could unshare your screen, and then I just have 1 minute left for the final comments. Boom, 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 boom. So I would like to spend just a few seconds on our next events. So we have in beginning of January, so the 8th of January, we have an open door. And what we do with the open door is that we give people the opportunity to basically ask whatever questions they have. It's not a pitch competition. So you can present your problem in front of one of the investment managers from Pre-Seed Ventures. There's no guaranteed spot because you get 30 minutes with one of the 3 or 4 investment managers. So we don't have unlimited spaces, but that's an opportunity for you to ask any questions you might have. You can apply for this at Pre-Seed Academy. I know also there'll be sent link out after this call for that. And the second event is the next StartupTalk, and that is on the 20th of January. And that will basically fall in line with this initial talk we had about buyer personas, because the next step will then be, now you have identified buyer personas, how are you going to use them, how are you going to use them with data, and that will be the next topic of the Startup Talk, where of course it's free, everyone is invited in. You can sign up from a Pre-Seed Academy, not now, because I know there will be a new website coming up very soon, but you will get a direct link for both events very soon. So with these words, I will say thanks for all of you for attending, and especially thanks both Scarlett and Kara for taking the time to present this. As already mentioned in the chat, this has been recorded. There will be sent out recordings afterwards in a day or so. So thank you very much, and have a nice day, and have a nice holiday season when you come to that.